by the grace of the power that I found in the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink for 6,155 days today, one day at a time, and for this I'm very grateful. Everybody doing okay this morning? Yes. Everybody get a good night's sleep? Yes. Have a good breakfast this morning? Yes. You want to hear a little story before we start? Huh? Always our stories are about alcoholics. This particular one is about a drunken burglar who broke into a house one night. Nobody home, no lights on. He had a little pencil flashlight. He found the wall safe, and he was working on the wall safe trying to get it open. And he heard a little voice say, "Jesus sees you." And he jumped and he flashed that light around, and he didn't see anybody or anything, so he goes back to working on the safe again. And after a while the little voice said, "Jesus is watching you." And he jumped and he flashed that light around, and he still didn't see anybody. And he goes back to work on that safe again, and after a while the little voice said, "Jesus is going to get you." And he jumped and he flashed that light around again, and this time he flashed it in a corner that he hadn't before. And sure enough, there in the bird cage was a parrot. And he said, "Oh, you damn silly bird, you don't know what you're talking about." And he turned to go back to the wall safe, and the light went across the doorway, and standing in the doorway was a large German shepherd dog with his lips all snarled back and his fangs showing. And the little voice said, "Sick him, Jesus."
My name is Joe, and I'm a real alcoholic.
Hi, Joe.
Through God's grace, and because this program works, I haven't had a drink since March 10th, 1962. For this, I'm extremely grateful. Good to be back here this morning, and I was just sitting here reminiscing, as our book says, we can laugh at ourselves and thinking about the announcement about the pictures being taken. I remember some years ago when I would get my picture taken and they would tell me to turn to the left and the right. I wish I should have told them they were breaking my anonymity.
If you had known it was going to be a status symbol, you'd have kept a record of it too, wouldn't you?
Last night, as we completed our inventory, I don't know, I get this excitement about the inventory as if I was about to take it. And I really think that through the big book, and we could, I think how blessed you people are with the big book and the opportunity they have to go through this process and find the details they can in their lives through the big book. And having gathered that information, and we have completed those sheets and completed the inventory at this point. We move into step 5, and what do we do with it? On page 72, having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? We have been trying, and this is what it tells us what this thing is all about. You know, it's not about sobriety. It's not about not drinking. We have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path, the things that block us off from our Creator. We have omitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast out. This requires action on our part, which when completed, it will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our defects. This brings us to the 5th step in the program of recovery mentioned in the preceding chapters.
I think, again, we see this little peculiarity of Bill's, where he had a tendency to use different words at different times to mean basically the same thing. You know, on that inventory sheet last night, the 4th column that we had said, what is the exact nature of our wrongs, faults, mistakes, defects, or shortcomings? And we said, whatever we wish to call them. And we believe that Bill, in the writing of the book, rather than repeat himself over and over and over again, kept using different words to indicate these defects of character. You know, you notice in step 5 that the step itself says we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. But here in the narrative, in this chapter, in this first paragraph that Joe just read, he said, which will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. So he used wrongs in the writing of the step. But in this narrative, he used the word defects. We find that in step 6, he talked about defects. We became willing to have God remove all these defects of character. Then in step 7, he used the term shortcomings, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And we're going to be able to see on the next 2 or 3 pages, especially, where Bill used these words interchangeably back and forth. And always people would ask Bill again, why did you do this? How come you keep using these different terms? What's the difference between a wrong and a defect and a shortcoming? What do you mean by a mistake or a fault? And they said always that Bill would kind of rear back again and smile and say, well, they taught me when I took those English courses in college never to use the same words in consecutive sentences. He said, therefore I call them different things, but they all mean the same thing. He said, these are the things that we find when we take step 4 that block us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. He said, these are the things we talk about when we talk to another human being in 5. And these are the things we become willing to get rid of in 6. And these are the things we ask God to take away in 7. And he said, it really doesn't make any difference what you call them. He said, you can call them a wrong, or you can call them a fault, or you can call them a mistake, or you can call them a defect, or you can call them a shortcoming, or you can call them a personality trait, or whatever you would like to call them would be fine. Those are the things that block us off from the sunlight of the Spirit that we're trying to get rid of. And as we read these next 3 steps and work on these next 3 steps, we're going to see him use these interchangeably back and forth. And here in step 5, this is the first time that he really begins to use it. And he calls it defects in the narrative, where in the step he called it wrongs. Also, I think we might look at the idea that this chapter is called into action. Now, we've already taken some action. We took a little bit of action when we used the prayer in step 3. We've taken action pretty well by ourselves when we took step 4. But in this particular step, we're going to start reaching out not only to God, but also to another member of the human race. And we find that all human beings are born with 3 dimensions of life. We've already seen them and talked about them some in the book. The book talked about us being spiritually sick. It talked about us being mentally sick. And it talked about us being physically sick. And it said when the spiritual malady is overcome, then the mental and the physical automatically straightens out. And all human beings are born to live in 3 dimensions of life. All of us have at the core what they call the Spirit. And the book referred to that as deep down inside every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. There's some basic knowledge that seems to dwell within each of us that they refer to as the Spirit. Now, whether we like it or not, we have to live with that Spirit. And the only question is, do we want to live with it in harmony, or do we want to live with it in disharmony? All my life I lived with it in disharmony. Now I'm finally beginning to try to live in harmony with the Spirit. Also, all human beings do have a mind, this thinking apparatus up here in our head. Whether we like it or not, it is there. And we do have to live with it. And the only question is, do we want to live with it in harmony or disharmony? Always I've been screwed up in my head, lived in disharmony with my mind. Hopefully now I can learn how to get it straightened out and live with it in harmony. All human beings do have to live in the 3rd dimension of life that we refer to as the physical. And the physical doesn't necessarily mean just our body. The physical is the world and everything that is material within the world, which includes other human beings, people, places, things, and etc. And we all have to live in the world. There's just no way we can get around that. You know, many of us try to sneak up on a mountaintop and become a hermit, but even then we still have to come down sometimes and buy some beans and maybe a side of bacon and a few things to eat. None of us can live completely by ourselves. And the only question is, again, do we live in the physical with harmony or disharmony? We got to live there, and the question becomes, how are we going to live in it? And I think as we'll go through the steps, we'll be able to see where they are designed to put us back in harmony in all three areas of life. And that may be why they call this one Into Action. Because this is the one where we first begin to try to reach out to the rest of the human race. Now, I got right with God in steps 1, 2, and 3. I got right with the Spirit there. There's where I admitted my defeat. And there's where I gave up on me. And there's where I began to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And there's where I made a decision to let that power do that in step 3. And for the first time in my entire life, as long as I can remember, I have developed a proper relationship between myself and God as I understand Him. Always before, I told Him what I wanted Him to do. Now then, I'm letting Him be the director of my life. I'm letting God determine the direction I'm going to take. And I got right with God in 1, 2, and 3. I began to get right with me in step 4. This is the first time I ever really looked at me. This is the first time I looked at my stock in trade. This is the first time I looked to see what my thoughts were and what they do to me. And I begin to get right with me in step 4. And in step 5, I reach out to another member of the human race, and it is the beginning of getting right in that dimension of life also. Now, probably that's why Bill named this Into Action. This is very rather difficult to do, reaching out to another human being, as Willie told us yesterday. Now, my book said in the second paragraph, this is perhaps difficult, especially discussing our defects with another person. See, he didn't say wrongs, he said defects with another person. We think we've done well enough in admitting these things to ourselves. There is doubt about that. In actual practice, we usually find the solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reasons why we should do so. The best reason first, if we skip this vital step, we may not overcome drinking. And that's about as good a reason as I can think of to go ahead and take step 5. But now the book tells me why this is true. It said time after time newcomers have tried to keep to themselves certain facts about their lives. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Almost invariably they got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. Now, I think this is where the difficulty came in on step 4. We didn't know how to do 4, so we read this statement in step 5, and we said, well, apparently what we need to do in 4 then is sit down and write out all of our life story. And we let what was said in 5 determine what we should do in 4. You know, and it's kind of getting the cart before the horse. Actually, if we take step 4, as the big book says, and we list and analyze our resentments that's in our head today, that's on our shelves today, they didn't come just from today. They came throughout my entire lifetime. Some of my resentments occurred from yesterday, some from a week ago, and some from a year ago, and some from 10 years ago, and some from 15 and 20. I've been building up resentments all my life. And if I share all my resentments with another human being, I'm going to be sharing all my life story regarding resentments. The same way with my fears. The fears that I have on my shelf today, they didn't come from today. They came from what happened yesterday and last week and last month and a year ago and 10 years ago and 15 and 20. My fears have been embedded in my mind all my life as long as I can remember. And if I share all my fears with another human being, I'm sharing all my life story as far as fears are concerned. The harms that I do to other people, the guilt and the remorse in my head associated with those things, they didn't come from what I did today. That comes from what I did yesterday, last week, last month, last year, 5, 10, 15, and 20 years ago. And if I share the harms I've done to other people with another human being, I'm sharing all my life story as far as where and how I've hurt other people. And basically, these are the three major parts of my life story that block me off from the sunlight of the Spirit. There's really not any need for me to write a long narrative and share the parts of my story that has nothing to do with my drinking. What I'm trying to do is find out what blocks me off from God's will. And my book said the three common manifestations are the resentments and the fears and the harms I do to other people. And if I share those fully, then I'm sharing all my life story regarding the basic things that block me off from the sunlight of the Spirit and that cause me to drink. And I really believe that's probably as far as we need to go. You know, there's many parts of my life story which absolutely has nothing to do with my drinking. The fact I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1929 has nothing at all to do with my drinking. Now, the fact that I lost all my front teeth when I was 5 years old, that has nothing to do with my drinking. The things that concern my drinking and what blocks me off from God are the things that I'll be sharing with another human being. Now, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life. He is very much the actor. And again, we see references to the actor. We saw that in step 3. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. And I think probably we are the world's greatest actors. You almost have to be an actor if you're going to be a practicing alcoholic. You really can't let them see what goes on inside. You really can't let them see what you were doing last night or last week whenever you were drinking. You go into the office on Monday morning, you got up out of bed about 6:30, and your head was just literally splitting and about to blow up. You were just sick all over and shaking and trembling. And you went into the bathroom and you got down on your knees and you loved the commode for about 30 minutes. Then you got up and you looked in the mirror and you tried your best to shave, and you could hardly do that. You went in and tried to eat a little breakfast, and you had a bite or two of egg maybe, and you almost vomited. And maybe you drank a cup of coffee, and then you go to work, and my God, you're sicker than those people are in the hospital. And you see the boss, and he says, "How are you this morning, John?" And you say, "Oh, great, I just feel fine. I'm right on top of the world." But hell, you're dying inside, you know. In order to be a practicing alcoholic, you've got to become one of the world's greatest actors and one of the world's greatest con artists. You've got to develop the ability to lie. You know, you absolutely could not exist as a practicing alcoholic if you could not lie to other people, especially. And then also, we've got to be able to lie to ourselves. I doubt very seriously if I could have lived with what went on in my life when I was drinking if I did not have that ability to rationalize away, to con and manipulate me, and to be able to blame everything on other people. You know, we are the world's greatest actors. The inconsistencies made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, he is revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed it. As far as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. He is under constant fear and tension, and that makes for more drinking. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We've spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we've given these doctors a fair break. We have seldom told them the whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we were honest with no one else. And it really doesn't make much sense, but an alcoholic will go to a psychiatrist and pay him anywhere from $50 to $100 an hour, for the privilege of lying down on his couch and telling him lies. You know, we sit there, we let her for the whole hour and tell him a whole bunch of lies and pay him money for the privilege of being able to do that. Why would I think suddenly in step 4 that I'm going to become 100% honest? You know, when I took step 4, I tried to the best of my ability to be honest with me, but I find it's impossible for me to be honest with me. I'm such a liar and a con artist and a manipulator of people that when I tried to take step 4, I found I could not be honest with me. I need to take this information in step 4, and I need to take it to another human being who knows what I'm trying to do. One who understands human nature. One who can help me find my character defects. And it's amazing, I take this thing to the other human being, and he looks over this sheet, and he said, "Oh, Charlie," he said, this here wasn't caused by being frightened. This was caused by plain damn dishonesty. Or he says, "This one was caused by inconsideration of other people." And he helps me become honest with me. The other human being can look at me and look at these things from an objective point of view. I can't do that. I find I am so dishonest that even after 16 and a half years, I can't be honest with me today always. I catch myself continually rationalizing things and excusing myself, for things that I do which I really shouldn't be doing. And my book says we must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long or happily in this world. So there's sure, talking to another human being about these things, confession is good for the soul. There's not any doubt about that. But that most certainly is not the major reason for doing step 5. The major reason is to extract all the truth about ourselves that we can possibly find. I heard a guy say one time, he said, "I took my step 5 with a Mexican who didn't speak any English at all." And he said, "Then I took him out fishing in a boat and shoved him out and drowned him." I doubt if he got a hell of a lot of good out of step 5, too. Because I'm sure that person didn't help him find out his character defects. Joe?
As Charlie said, the point of step 5 is to improve on actually the information we have gathered in step 4. And as he says, to find out the exact nature of the wrong. And as we go to the person with these sheets, he's going to be able to question us about each of these resentments and fears and our sex conduct. And as he goes over them, he can maybe improve on some of these information. Some of the things in column 3 he can correct. Some of the things in column 4 he might change. Because this person is not involved, wasn't involved, but he does have the knowledge and ability, having experiences himself, to help us improve on the inventory process. And as Charlie said, we just cannot be honest with ourselves. If we admit that today, and this is the real truth of ourselves, the honesty, we only live, as we said, on truth based on our opinion of the truth. We don't know the real truth. And it's the search for this truth is what the success of our lives is all about. And I think as we look at the qualities that it speaks of throughout this program, honesty, willingness, and open-mindedness, these are some awesome things to obtain. And none of them can be attained by yourself. You can't be honest by yourself. And we really can't be willing by ourselves, and we can't be open-minded by ourselves. These things come from other people, and this is the beginning of this process. For the first time in step 5, we're going beyond ourselves. Now on page 74, we begin here, and looking at this page, it's mostly devoted to how to select or giving us some ideas. Or this page tells us who to take step 5 with, how to locate and how to search out a person to take step 5 with. We'd have to look at it in the context in which it's written to really understand this page. This book was written in 1939 when the first 100 wrote the book in 1939, and it was going out all over the world. The book had to be completed. It's got a lot of detail in it. And it was written so that anybody anywhere could have bought the book somewhere in California, if they were to buy the book, or here in Canada, they could this book would be able to give them everything they needed to work the program. And in 1939, when the book was written and it came here to Canada the first time, there weren't any sponsors here. There weren't anybody here to take step 5 with. So the book had to be written to give the reader ability to select somebody somewhere within his community, because he couldn't go to a sponsor. God, we're blessed today. We don't have that problem. But it says, right and natural, we think well before we choose a person with whom we are to take this intimate and confidential step. Now, those of us belonging to a religious denomination which requires confession must, of course, want to go to the properly appointed authority whose duty is it to receive it. Now, he deals with those belonging to that religious area. They are all right. They can go to a priest, the person who's appointed to receive this. And those who don't belong to those who don't not belong to religious connection may still do well to talk to someone ordained in established religion. You know, it said that, you know, maybe y'all could go to someone in a religious area even though you don't belong to that religion. This is what the new people had to do when they got the book in 1939. We often find such a person quick to see and understand our problems. Of course, we sometimes encounter people who do not understand the alcoholic. I imagine he did in 1939. She said, if we cannot do this, now he says he gives us another alternative. We search out acquaintance or a close mouth understanding friend. Now, in 1939, you had to go take your inventory to your friend. That wasn't too good either. But it gets worse after that. Perhaps your doctor or psychologist will be the person. Now he's really running out. It may be one of your own family. You know, it really, he goes, you know, just search out it and see how buried. And this is why we can see how difficult it must have been for those earlier people. But today we do have sponsors. But we cannot disclose anything to our wives, oh my God, or our parents. It might hurt them or make them unhappy. Well, you know, our wives, we don't want to disclose these things to them. Well, we have no right to save our skin at another person's expense. Such parts of our Torah we tell to someone who will understand yet be unaffected. The rule is we must be hard on ourselves, but always considerate of others. Now, over on page 75, he begins to tell us, he tells us exactly how to proceed with this step. When we have decided who is to hear our story, we waste no time. We have a written inventory. Over and over through here, it uses the word inventory or written inventory. We are prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we are about to do and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. Most people approaching this way will be glad to help. They will be honored by our confidence. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Now here's the results of step 5. Once we have taken this step, withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling to drink probably disappeared, but will often come strongly. We feel we're on a broad highway walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. Now we look at the results of step 5, and actually we like to compare them throughout with the other steps. There weren't any from 1 and 2. Step 3 was just the beginning. And in step 4, we had a little patience, tolerance, and love, and compassion for the people who had hurt us. But here at step 5 is probably the first greatest results of all the steps. And probably the reason it is because it's the first step of action. It says step 5 is the beginning of the spiritual experience, not step 3. Because really, we get more results out of the action steps than we do just making the decision of the doing of the inventory. And the more we put into the steps, the more we get out of them. And probably one of the most positive influences so far, it comes from step 5. But the spiritual experience begins. Remember in step 2 we said, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We begin with beliefs, but after step 5 we begin to have the spiritual experience. So after we have completed step 5, we have a little rest point, and we do need a rest after these steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he thought enough to. He says, returning home to find a place where we can be quiet for an hour. We get a little rest.
He didn't say 38 days. Now he said 1 hour.
He said 1 hour. And Charlie likened that. We always think about taking a little trip in our automobile. We always say you might drive in the rest stop for rest, but you wouldn't camp out in there. You just go in there to rest. Now it says, reviewing what we have done. We thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. It didn't say we knew God, but we know Him better than we did when we started. Taking this book down from the shelves, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we asked if we admitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. Is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement, put the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And remember, we said as we talked about this arch, and he's using these as a parable, because this arch is the same thing as the spiritual experience. And he's saying that as we build this arch, we started off with willingness was the foundation. We said believing was the cornerstone. We said step 3 was the keystone, a new and triumphant arch through which we passed to freedom. And now we get to step 4. We get to step 5. We'll put in steps 4 and 5. And we can see this picture he's building, this arch in our minds. And he says if these we can answer to our satisfaction, if we can say yes, that these first 5 stones are properly in place, then we can move on to step 6.
I think it's quite easy to see if we should do steps 4 and 5 as the big book says to do it. We're not looking at something negative in our lives. We're looking at something positive. Both of these steps are a very, very positive experience. In step 4, we really find out what it is that blocks us off from the sunlight of the Spirit. In step 4, we begin to work on those resentments and those fears and those guilts and etc. associated with the things we've done in the past. And as those things disappear, then we begin to develop some peace of mind and happiness and serenity. In step 5, we take these things and we talk about them to another human being, and they help us find them and look at them honestly and help us see what we really do need to get rid of in order to be able to receive God's direction in our life. And if we do 4 and 5 the way the book says, we get certain positive gains from them. There's really nothing to be afraid about in either one of them, providing we know how and understand how to do them. And as we said yesterday, the simplicity of them absolutely amazes me when we finally were able to see how to do this thing. Always before we had complicated it to the point we couldn't see it. But now as we use them, we begin to see these things disappear and we begin to get better and better. And as the book says, it is really the beginning of the spiritual experience. We're right into this thing already. Our personality is now beginning to change. Now, if we can answer those questions on page 75 at the bottom of the page to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6 over on page 76. And on page 76, we're going to find 2 paragraphs only that deal with steps 6 and 7. And Joe and I sometimes refer to them as bang-bang steps because it doesn't take very long to do them, providing you're ready to do these things. It tells me at the top of page 76, if we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Well, that isn't what step 6 says at all, is it? Step 6 says we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character, but here in the narrative he didn't mention that at all. He said, are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? You know, we found those personality defects, those defects of character, those faults, those mistakes, those whatever you want to call them. And when we see they block us off from God's will, they should by now be becoming objectionable to us if we see that they block us off from God's will. Now, are we now ready to let God remove these things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. And again, the book recognizes that self cannot overcome self. In order to overcome self, we've got to have God's help and God's power. And the book recognizes that some of these character defects, even though we may recognize them as being the things that block us off from God's will, some of them we really don't want to get rid of. You know, let's face it, some of them are fun. Some of them are enjoyable. Some of them we have used so much through our lifetime to rationalize and excuse ourselves, it becomes very, very difficult to start trying to get rid of these things. Oh, it's hard to get rid of selfishness. It's awful hard to start becoming honest if you've been dishonest all your life. Very, very hard to start considering other people if you've always considered yourself first. Very, very difficult to practice courage if you've been filled with fear all your life. And that has become such a part of our makeup that sometimes we're scared to death of what's going to happen to us if those things are removed from us. Now, I remember distinctly telling my sponsor, I said, my God, you take all those things out of my personality, and I'm not going to have any personality left at all. And it was absolutely true, because that's the way I had lived all my life. And the book recognizes I may not want to get rid of some of these things. And if I don't want to get rid of them, it says we ask God to help us be willing to be willing, recognizing we cannot overcome this on our own. Now, when we are ready to get rid of them, then we say something like this. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character. Whoop! That isn't what Step 7 says. Step 7 said shortcomings, and here he calls them defects of character. You see what he's done to us? He's just played these words back and forth. In fact, I only found shortcomings in one place in the big book, and that's in Step 7. That's the only time he ever mentioned it. I went to the 12 and 12, and I looked up Step 7, and I read the whole narrative on it, and he never mentioned shortcomings until the last paragraph on Step 7 in the big book. He talked about defects of character all the way through. So it's plain that he intended for them to be the same thing. He didn't differentiate between them as he wrote the book itself. Here, as we talk about Step 7, he talks about defects of character. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed Step 7. It really doesn't take very long to take these two steps when you're ready to take them. But we also firmly believe that God will not do for us what we can do for ourselves. We also firmly believe that nature or God will not allow a vacuum in the human personality or a void any more than He will anywhere else in the universe. Always in a void or a vacuum there is something rushing into it to fill it up. And we don't believe that God will reach into the human mind and pluck out a character defect and leave a hole with nothing in it inside that mind. That simply cannot take place. If that defect is to be removed, then something will have to move into that space and fill that void up. And it seems as though the only thing that can move in there and fill it up is the opposite of the character defect. God can take away, but only I can try to practice the opposite. And using whatever willpower I can gather up, and using all the power that I can get from God as I understand Him, when I ask Him to take away my selfishness, then I'm going to have to start trying to become unselfish. I'm going to have to start trying to look at other people and see what it is they need. See what it is they want. And see what it is I can do for them. And oh God, this is hard to do when you've been a selfish individual all your life. If I want God to take away my dishonesty, chances are I'm going to have to start trying to be honest. Instead of telling those lies, instead of manipulating other people and me and conning everything, I'm going to have to start trying to be honest with me and other people. And that's hard to do when you've been dishonest all your life. If I want Him to take away fear, chances are I'm going to have to start practicing courage. If I want Him to take away inconsideration, chances are I'm going to have to start trying to consider other people. And as He takes away, and as I practice the opposite, slowly, 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 my personality continues to change. You know, my mind is nothing more than a set of mental habits. And they're habits that's been ingrained in my mind throughout my entire lifetime. And in order to change them, I must practice the opposite, and slowly, 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 the old habits can disappear, and the new habits begin to become a natural part of my life. And my personality undergoes a complete change. I now understand what they meant in chapter 5 when they said some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas and the results were nil. Now, if I keep trying to hold on to the old mental habits, I'll never be able to change. The only way I can change is with God's help to practice the opposite. You know, it's kind of like growing corn. If I go out here and plant corn in the ground, I plant the corn. I put it in the ground and I put the fertilizer there and I cover it up. But God makes the corn grow. But also when He makes corn grow, He makes weeds grow. And if I want my corn to be top-notch, high-quality corn, then I've got to do my part, and my part is to get rid of those weeds in that corn patch. You know, I've never yet seen God standing in a corn patch pulling weeds. That's my job to do if I want my corn to be good. And the same thing here. If I want my personality to change, then I've got to do my part, and my part is to try to become the opposite of whatever it is I'm trying to get rid of. And slowly, through exercise of my mind, I can gradually change the way I think, the way I feel, and my whole attitude and outlook upon life. Probably this is a job that I will work on with God's help for the rest of my life. I don't think we do 6 and 7 once and then just run off and leave them. I think we'll be doing this for the rest of our life. Because self always tries to bring the other back in. Self always tries to be selfish. It always tries to do and rationalize and con and manipulate, and I expect I'll fight it for the rest of my life. But with God's help, I can change my personality. It takes a lot of work, but I can actually do that over a period of time. Joe?
There's step 6 and 7 is really the tools of change. You know, all the other steps have put us in a position for step 6 and 7. And to me, it's like the chisel and the hammer, and we're chipping away to find the person we want to be constantly. And we begin in step 6 as we begin willing to let go of this, and in step 7 something will take its place, and these are things that as we begin to apply, and we grow through, and we have, as Charlie said, we are a set of mental habits, and we have to change these mental habits. And the way we change these mental habits is through step 4. We have seen the value of some of them. Anytime we use our old mental character, we haven't really inventoried it. Anytime we do something that is wrong like that, one of these old characters come out within our personality, we like to do it, but we haven't inventoried to see the damaging factor of it. If we inventoried and seen the value of it, then we could not do it. Then something could take its place. So we can see step 4 and 5 have really showed us the value of these things. And step 6 is the way we change is very simple. The way we change our mental habits is by not doing what we want to do. and by making ourselves do what we don't want to do. We change through working against ourselves. We will never change by doing what we want to do. If we do what we want to do, we will always be exactly the same. We change by doing what we don't want to do. And it's the same principle. A principle of living is the same anywhere we look at it. If we look at it in the physical realm, we can apply it to the mind. How do we change the mind? The same way we change the body. You know, I have some problems here. I want to change. I need to do some body changing. Everybody's into that now. They're losing weight. And, you know, they got some things on TV that say you can keep on eating the very same thing you've been eating and you can lose weight. Well, they want to get your money because that really won't work. The way you lose weight is not doing what you want to do and making yourself do what you don't want to do. I tell it all the time about Lou Bell bought me a jogging suit and she gave me a hint. And you know, I got the shoes and the whole outfit and, you know, and the intention of the jogging suit was to make me not do some of the things I was doing and do some things I don't want to do. But, you know, I'm pretty hung up on those things. And it's a beautiful thing, and usually I like to put it on. It's warm when I'm home, and I get up on the couch and eat jelly beans, and it really don't work. You know? and then it's the same way with, you know, as we are set of mental habits. And that whatever we are today, and our mind produces these mental habits. And the way we got these mental habits in the first place, we worked to get them. You know, we didn't just get sick overnight. We fed these things day in and day out and used them year in and year out. And they are part of our minds. So how do we change them? We have a right now. Our book says, think, easy does it, slow your life down. When these old thoughts come up, we just don't buy into them. We don't lend actions to them. And if we don't lend actions to these thoughts, they will die in our mind. And they will be replaced by new thoughts. And our book says the old ideas will be cast to one side and new set of motives begin to dominate our mind. So we have the ability now at 6 and 7 to change our lives in any area we want. We have the ability to not lend actions to those thoughts when they produce, not lend actions to the selfishness and resentments and the fears. We can turn our thoughts to something different and they will take their place. And pretty soon these old ideas will fade away and they won't come into our minds anymore. And the new thought habits that we work at will become a part of our personality. And we have the ability to change, and we change through dying daily. We have to die somewhere in order to live. We can't live within the same stuff and expect to live from somewhere. We have to die somewhere so that we can live. And just like Charlie was talking about his corn, you know, we would like to grow a beautiful stalk of corn. But you know, the only way you can grow one stalk of corn is one seed has to die. Something has to die so that we can live. And this is the principle. This has been the principle. But we have the right. We can change and change and change with these two twos, step 6 and 7. It's up to us. We have been given these earlier steps that have given us two beautiful tools to use. And as we fashion them on our lives and work against ourselves, then we can change and change for the rest of our lives. This is the real miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, that our lives are in our hands at this point of step 6 and 7.
How about getting a hold of the
As Charlie always says, he said, we get what we work for. He likes me to tell that one, and I had a guy tell me, he said that many years ago, he said, you know, this is all about work. He said, you just don't pray for potatoes. He said, when you pray for potatoes, you go out and get a hoe. And he said, not one with high heel shoes on either, one of those other things. So, it's really work, but working on ourselves, you know, those of us who have had this experience, working on yourself, you know, is the most rewarding project we're going to ever face. It is the most rewarding project because we'll get more out of this work than any other work we'll ever do on face this earth. You know, it's a job we do on ourselves.
We tried to tell that thing about the potatoes in Australia. And they didn't laugh at all. They don't understand black language for hoe.
Oh, they call it a hoe something else.
Besides that, they called a hoe something different. We got all screwed up over there.
What's the matter with them people?
I think maybe I understand now what they talk about in the book when they say we were reborn.
We're born.
Now that has nothing to do with the physical body at all.
Right.
We were reborn in our mind.
That's right.
You know, I worked and worked and worked to become the personality that I used to be.
Okay.
It took me 40 years to develop that selfish, self-centered, self-seeking, dishonest, inconsiderate personality. And I'm going to have to work and work and work for the rest of my life to change that personality. But gradually as selfishness disappears, gradually as dishonesty disappears, gradually as fear disappears, gradually as inconsideration of others disappears, I become an entirely new human being. You know, we were reborn. And I find the rapidity with which I am reborn is based exactly on how willing I am to work toward it. If I want to change, I can do it. But only I can do this. Nobody else can do this for me. God cannot do it for me because God gave me self-will to use. And He said, I'll leave you with that self-will for as long as you want to be left with it. And if I don't want to change, I'm not going to change. God will not make me as pure as the driven snow just because I ask Him to do that. I must do my part. And the longer I work at it and the harder I work at it, the faster and the better I'm going to change. And we've got to face it, you know, we're going to fight self the rest of our life. God will never take all of self away from us. If He did, we would be a God ourselves. We would be perfect, and He's not going to let that happen. We're going to fight self all of our lives. Some days I don't want to work at it. By golly, some days I want to be upset. Like Willie, some days I want to be nervous as hell. There's times I rebel at the thought of changing. But I find that if I want to change, I can do that with God's help. But only I can do it. Nobody else can do it for me. It's a job that I and God working together can accomplish. And slowly, 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 I become an entirely different person. Now, we never do get to stop, though. It tells me in page 76 on the middle of the page, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Let's look at steps 8 and 9. Now, in your handout sheet, another little example we have is 3 circles. And we've kind of drawn these 3 circles to illustrate the 3 dimensions of life. And we can begin to see where the steps fit into these 3 dimensions. Now, we've heard over and over and over that AA is an inside job, which means we start at the core or we start at the center. AA is a little different than most of the rest of the world. You know, most people say to the alcoholic, let's start on the outside and let's get your job straightened up, and let's get your relationship with your wife straightened up, and let's get your relationship with your material things straightened up, and then you won't have to drink. AA said, no, that isn't true. AA said, let's start in the center and work from the center out and make our outer relationships the last thing we do. You know, I used to work on that outer relationship, always thinking that if I got it straightened up, it'd be okay. You know, I used to lose my job, but maybe I'd have my wife and my automobile. Well, then I'd start working to get the job back, and sure enough, I'd get it back, but in the meantime, perhaps I'd lost the wife and I had the car. Well, then I'd go to working on the wife, and by the time I got her back, hell, I'd lost the car. And by the time I got the car and the wife both back, I'd lost the damn job again. I never could get the outside straightened up. AA says, let's go in the middle and start from the inside out. And they say, let's get right with the Spirit first. Let's develop the proper relationship with God as we understand Him. Let's put God back in the center of our life. You know, at one time that was true with us. When we were first born, the Spirit was the center of our life when we were little bitty babies. And when the center was God, then the mental was okay and the relationship with people was all right. Nothing any happier than a little baby. You know, they're always goo-gooing and always chuckling and laughing and smiling, and everybody just loves them. But after a while, the little baby finds that if I scream and cry long enough, by God, they'll pay attention to me. And I can get my milk and I can get my diapers changed that way. And we get off of God and we put self at the center. And when self gets in the center, then the mind starts to get screwing up, and then our relationship with people gets fouled up. And by the time we're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, my God, nobody can stand the Spirit. And as we become teenagers, and our life gets so screwed up, we finally find alcohol. And we take that alcohol and we drink it, and immediately it replaces self. Alcohol becomes the center of our life. And the more alcohol we use, the worse the mental condition becomes, and the worse it becomes, the more screwed up we are with people, places, and things. And the book says, let's first get alcohol out of the way. And that puts us back on self. And then the book says, now let's take self out of the way and put the Spirit back in the middle. And we do that in steps 1, 2, and 3. We let God be the director of our life. We actually set up that relationship between ourselves and God. Now that God is the center of the life, then we can work on our mind. You know, that removes enough self to allow us to work on our mind. And we take 4, 5, 6, and 7, and that straightens out our mind. And when our mind is straightened out, then we can work on that outer circle, our relationship with the world and everything in it. But until my mind is straight, I can't straighten up all those outer relationships. So 4, 5, 6, and 7 straightens me out in the second dimension, the dimension of the mind or the mental. Now to be a full, complete, well-rounded, whole human being, I need to go into the third dimension and straighten up my relationship with the world and everybody in it. And when I do that, then I am again a full, well-rounded, human being in all 3 dimensions of life. And it's a well-known fact, and it's been well known to mankind for centuries, that the only way you can straighten up your relationship with other people, the only way that you can get rid of guilt and fear and remorse associated with the things that you've done to hurt people, is to make restitution. We've always known that forever. And again, it's not a question of whether we want to or not. It's a question of whether I can live without straightening up these relationships. If I don't get them straight, then eventually that guilt and that remorse and that fear is going to back up in my mind. And I'm going to become sick again in my head. And if I become sick again in my mind, then that will back up and I will become sick at the soul or the spirit. And I may let self replace God, and then alcohol probably replace self. So it's not a question of whether I want to or not. The only question is, can I live without it? And I've got to go back to one of our 2 co-founders to see what actually happened to one of them. You know, when Bill first brought the message to Dr. Bob, and he found out Dr. Bob was already going to the Oxford group, he was already trying to have a spiritual experience. He was already trying to apply the practical program of action in his life, but he had never been able to apply it to a depth that he needed to in order to recover. And when Bill brought him the idea of the disease, Then Dr. Bob began to practice it to a depth that he never had before, but he didn't get sober immediately. Shortly thereafter, it became necessary for him to go to a medical convention that he had always gone to. And his wife Ann said, Bill, don't let him go, because if he goes down there, he's going to get drunker in hell. So he does it every time. He never goes without getting drunk. And Bill said, well, he's going to have to learn to live in the world where alcohol is without drinking it. Sooner or later, he's got to go back and join the human race. But he might as well go. And if he gets drunk, he gets drunk. And Dr. Bob went to the medical convention, and sure enough, he got drunk. And when he showed up back home, he showed up over with his nurse's house or something like that, and she called Bob and Ann and said, come and get him. He's here, and it's midnight, and he's drunk, and somebody got to do something with him. And she said, besides that, he's got surgery in the morning, and somebody has to sober him up and get him ready for surgery. So they got him, and they worked with him practically all night, and I'm sure they walked him and poured the coffee down him, and etc. And by the next morning, he was reasonably sober. And Bill took him to the hospital in order to perform the surgery, and Dr. Bob said, Bill, I can't do that surgery. He said, look at my hands, I'm shaking, I'm trembling, I'm sick, there's no way that I can do this surgery. And Bill said, oh yeah, you can do that. And he reached in the back seat of the car, and he got out a bottle of beer in the parking lot of the hotel, and he said, drink this and you'll be all right. And Dr. Bob drank it, and he went upstairs, and he performed the surgery, and everything came out okay. But then he disappeared. And Bill waited and waited and waited, and he didn't show up, and finally we all went back to Dr. Bob's house with Ann, and he and Ann waited practically all day. And late that evening, Dr. Bob showed up, and Bill said, where in the hell have you been? He assumed that the beer had triggered the allergy, and Dr. Bob was off getting drunk again. But to his amazement, Dr. Bob was sober, and Bill said, where in the hell have you been? He said, I've been going up and down both sides of the street making my amends. Always before, he had never been able to do that. He was afraid that if people found out he was an alcoholic, it would ruin his reputation. He always had considered it as a lack of willpower, moral character, and he was ashamed of it. This was the first time he had been able to apply the program to that depth, and that bottle of beer was the last drink that Dr. Bob ever took. You see, when he worked steps 8 and 9, he became a full, whole, well-rounded human being, and he recovered from his disease of alcoholism, and he never had to drink again. And I believe today that if I don't do these things, if I don't get rid of remorse, if I don't get rid of fear, if I don't get rid of guilt, then those are going to block me off from my peace of mind and serenity and happiness. Those are the things that will keep me restless and irritable and discontented, and those are the things that will cause me eventually to go back to drinking. It is most certainly I did not take 8 and 9 and make amends because I wanted to. You know, if I'd have been allowed to do what I wanted to, I'd have said, to hell with this, I'm not about to swallow this pill. But I don't think I have any choice in this matter. And it seems as though the book thinks the same thing. It says, let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all persons we've harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. And that's exactly right. You know, when we made our resentment list, we found that a lot of those people on that list were people that we had harmed and had rationalized away the part we had done and had transferred all blame on them when they retaliated against us. And I found that most of the people on my resentment list were those that I had harmed. When I made my fears list, I found many of the people there were people I had harmed, and they hadn't found out yet what I had done to them. And I'm scared to death of what they are going to do when they catch me. Just like the Internal Revenue Service, scared to death they're going to catch me. Just like scared of my boss, because if he ever finds out that I've really been padding that expense account, what's going to happen to him? And I find out a lot of people on that list were also people I had harmed. When I reviewed my conduct of the past, I found there many, many people I had harmed. And I have a pretty complete list. By the time I reach step 8, there may be 1, 2, or 3, 4, 5 or more I've thought of, and if so, I need to add them on the list too. But I've got most of the list made. I made it when I took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. The book recognizes that self cannot overcome self. Every step has prayer in it. We ask until it comes. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And I distinctly remember when I got to step 8. I had a great amount of difficulty with it. Because there were some people on my list that I had harmed, that I felt that they had harmed me just as bad as I ever harmed them. And I didn't think it was necessary for me to make any amends to those people. And I remember going to my sponsor and asking him about this, and I said, Neil, I don't believe I can take step 8. And he said, how come? And I said, well, there's people that harm me as bad as I've ever harmed them, and I certainly do not feel like I need to make any amends to those people. And he said, oh, Charlie, he said, I think you're getting the cart before the horse. He said, step 8 doesn't say anything about making amends. He said, step 9 talks about making amends. He said, you don't have to make any amends at all until you get to step 9. He said, step 8 says that you just become willing to make amends to those people. And I said, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not willing to make amends to some of those people because they've hurt me as bad as I've hurt them. He said, okay, I'll tell you what, let's do. He said, why don't we take step 8 and treat it as a 2-part step? He said, many of our steps are multiple-part steps. He said, let's look at 8 as a 2-part step. He said, the first part says we made a list of all persons we had harmed. And he said, Charlie, you took your 5th step with me. And you had a list of those people, and you made it when you took 4. And he said, now you got 2 or 3 you probably need to add on. He said, add them on. He said, can you go home and get out your inventory and compile from that a list of people you have harmed? And I said, well, sure. That's not difficult at all. He said, okay, go home, make the list, and come back and see me. So I went home and got out the inventory and completed the list to the best of my ability, and I took it back to him and I said, now, here's your damn list. But there's some people on here I do not intend to make amends to. He said, all right, that's fine. He said, let me give you some suggestions. You want to put this on the board? Yeah, let's see. We got it. He said, let me give you some suggestions. He said, there's some people on this list that you love, and they love you, and you would really like to get this thing straightened out with them just as soon as you can. Is that right? And I said, well, sure. My mother's on there. My brother's on there. My children's there. I'm not sure about my wife, whether I'm that crazy about it or not, but my wife's on there too. And he said, let's take a sheet of paper and let's divide it into 4 columns. And he said, let's head the left-hand column right now. And he said, let's take those people that you're willing to make amends to right now and put them in that first column. Can you do that? And I said, sure, no problem. He said, okay, do it, and then come back. And I did that, and I went back to him, and he said, now then, there's some people on your list that you know you're going to make amends to them. You're not too keen about it, but you know sooner or later you'll end up making amends to them. Is that right? And I said, certainly it is. He said, okay, let's take those people, put them in the second column, and let's just head it later. He said, can you do that? And I said, yeah. And he said, go do it. And then come back. And I came back and he said, now then, there's some on here that you aren't sure about. You may or may not want to make amends to them. Is that right? And I said, yeah. He said, let's take the third column, put their names on it, and let's head it up, maybe. Can you do that? And I said, yeah. He said, do it and then come back. And I came back and he said, now, those that are left on here, those are the suckers that you're not ever going to make amends to, right? And I said, you damn right. He said, okay, let's put them in the 4th column and let's head it up never. He said, now then, you can start making amends to the right nows. And he said, by the time you're through with the right nows, I believe you'll be ready to start on the laters. And he said, I'm quite sure by the time you're through with the laters, you'll be ready to do a couple of the maybes. And he said, I'll bet you money by the time you're through with the maybe column, you'll be ready to do those nevers. And you know, the old fool was absolutely right. He gave me a point at which to start. I had blocked myself up entirely from 8 and 9 because of 3 or 4 or 5 names. He gave me a starting point that I could go ahead with these steps and gradually become willing to make amends to everybody on the list. If I'd had to become willing 100% before I could have started making amends, I doubt if I could have done it. But he did give me a starting point, and it worked for me just fine. Joe?
Miss Charlotte said the secret, as Bill said too, the secret to this whole process is the second part of step 8, the real power of our relationship with other people is in the, and sometimes I don't think we really hear it. He said it was in the willingness, not so much of doing this, but in the willingness to do it. This is the freedom. And this is what we're doing it for. We're trying to get free within our minds. And he says, probably there are some misgivings as we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt. We may feel different about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured. To some people we need not. They probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. At the moment we're trying to put our lives in order. But this is not the end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. This is what the real purpose of life is, to be happy is when we do this. So we begin, and as he goes through throughout, he gives us a lot of information throughout these pages. I think sometimes we don't really study and use the big book to take our steps 8 and 9, and there is a lot of narrative here as we go through it to help us take these 2 steps. I've never talked a lot of alcoholics who have problems with steps 8 and 9, and most people, and there seems to be a lot of trouble. And there's a lot of different things that come up in amends in different ways, should we or shouldn't we. But if we study our book, we can find something within the pages that really relate to any problem I've heard a person have with steps 8 and 9. So he tells us, skipping on down the next prayer, we don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it was serving a good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions, attacking common sense. Sometimes we shouldn't approach it, sometimes we should use this. The question of how to approach the man who hated us will arise. It may be he has done us more harm than we have done him, and though we have not acquired a better attitude toward him, we are still not keen about admitting our faults. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. It is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. This is quite obvious. It's easy to go to those people in the first list, as Charlie laid out. It's more beneficial than going to those people, the last ones on the end of that list. We get more benefit out of that, but we have to start somewhere.
I think again we need to look at words. The whole thing is tied up in our understanding of the words. And step 9 says we made direct amends. And probably there's 2 meanings of the word direct as used in step 9. I think one meaning is just exactly as it's just said right here on page 77. A direct amend is one-on-one, face-to-face. It seems as though there's more relief that comes from that type of amend than any other. The book does tell me later on if I can't do this, it'd be all right to write a letter or perhaps make a telephone call. But it seems as though the most relief comes from going to an individual one-on-one, face-to-face. That way we know and we are sure how that amends has been received. You see, the purpose of this is to remove guilt, remorse, and fear. And if I'm not willing to face this person one-on-one, I'm probably never going to get rid of all the fear. If I do it by telephone, then I'm still going to have in my head the fear that I'm going to run into that sucker someday on the street. If I do it by letter, I'm never sure. But if I go directly to them one-on-one, face-to-face, then it seems as though we get the most relief, the most removal of fear, guilt, and remorse by making this direct amend. Usually it also does some other things as we continue to read in that next paragraph. Bottom of the page.
Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argument. Simply we tell him that we will never get off our drinking, that we have done our utmost to straighten out the past. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so. Never to trying to tell him what he should do. His thoughts are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. In 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. Sometimes a man will call upon who admits his own faults. So feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rather do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Our former enemies sometimes praise what we are doing and wish us well. Occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone should throw us out of his office. We have made our demonstration, done our part. It's water over the dam.
See, this is what happened to me with this guy that I hated so bad. The one that I would gladly have killed if I could have got by with it without getting caught. When I finally did get around to making my amends to him, I did it on a face-to-face, one-on-one basis. Today, he and I are good friends. We were willing to forgive each other. He confessed his part, and I talked about my part, and we ended up being good friends again. I doubt if that would have happened with us if I had written him a letter or had done it by telephone call. But face-to-face, one-on-one, worked for me in that particular instance. I think there's another meaning of the word direct amends also. I think the word direct amends also means equal restitution. You know, it's not going to do a whole lot of good. If I stole $400 from you when I'm drinking, and I come to you today and I say, now look, I stole this $400 from you when I'm drinking, and I'm sure I'm sorry about that. Would you forgive me? Chances are you're going to say, well, I'm sorry about it too. Why the hell is my $400? And I'm trying to get rid of guilt and remorse and fear associated with those things. And it seems as though the only way I can do that is to repay what I've taken away, to make equal restitution. Now, in some cases where I've been dealing with emotional pains that I've harmed people, about all I can really do is say I'm sorry, and I'm going to try to do better in the future. But where it constitutes material things, such as money, then most certainly I can replace that money. Now, I know that some of us think, oh my God, that's such a large sum of money, I could never get that job done. Or with the alcoholic personality, we would rather wait till we get the whole sum of money in one lump sum and take it in and lay it down on the desk and with our grandiosity say, here it is, what a good boy I am. But usually that doesn't happen for us. Normally it's necessary for us to do this over a period of time where it deals with material things. The next paragraph deals with making equal restitution for a material thing. Joe?
Most alcoholics owe money. We do not dodge our creditors. Tell them what we're trying to do. We make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. Or are we afraid of disclosing alcoholism on theory may cause financial harm? Approaching this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arrange the best deal we can. We let these people know we are sorry. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go. For we are liable to drink if we're afraid to face them.
You see, if we don't pay this money back, that fear never goes. That remorse and guilt remains with us. I have a good friend that lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma that's been sober now over 30 years. And he told me some time ago, when he was 29 years sober, he said, Charlie, I paid the last of those suckers off last week. And I said, how do you feel, Dan? And he said, I feel 10 foot tall. He said, it's the first time in my life that I can remember that I don't owe somebody something for what I've taken away from them in the past. And he worked at it 29 years. But he finally got everybody paid back. And Dan did feel 10 foot tall. Anybody that would know Dan would realize what it really did for him. And I know that sometimes this seems impossible to do. But if we can do this, we will get more relief from this than we will any other way. Now, my book also tells me not only to make direct amends, it says I make them wherever possible. Wherever I can do that, that's what I go do. But the book also tells me when not to make these amends. It says we may direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or other people. And it also gives me some examples of when not to do this, when I might be hurting other people. Let's go to the bottom of page 78. Perhaps we have committed a criminal offense which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We have already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we are sure we would be imprisoned or lose our job if it were known. Maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Most of us have done this sort of thing. Maybe we are divorced and have remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony to number one. She is indignant about it and has a warrant out for arrest. That's a common form of trouble, too. Although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles which we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find the spiritual experience, we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing, no matter what the personal consequences may be. Prayer is involved in every step. It recognizes self can't overcome self. Some of this stuff's tough. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing, we have to be, we must not shrink at anything. Usually, however, other people are involved. Therefore, we are not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried. Because of resentment and drinking, he had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life, had secured a position when getting his head above water. It would have been impressive heroics if he had walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." But we thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. We suggested he write his first wife admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try to do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. Of course, she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. So, we see that we need to consider other people. Sometimes in the making of our amends, in our zeal to get rid of our guilt and remorse, we end up actually harming the person we're trying to make the amend to, and in some cases other people, and then we get to feel guilty about that. Let's look at one more example on the bottom of page 80.
Okay, now he deals with sex and sex outside of marriage. Chances are that we have domestic troubles, perhaps through a mix-up with a woman in a fashion we don't care to have advertised. We doubt that in this respect, alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people. We're no different, this is a common problem with all people. But drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. After a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How could she be anything else? The husband begins to feel lonely and sorry for himself. He commences to look around nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. Perhaps he is having a secret, exciting affair with a girl who understands. in fairness, we must say that she may understand. But how are we going to do it? What are we going to do about a thing like that? A man so involved often feels remorseful, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who has literally gone through hell for him. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. We have to do something about that. Really, something has to be done. If we are sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way, well, that we have been wild, should we tell her in detail? Undoubtedly, we should admit our faults. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She will want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. We are sorry what we have done, and God willing, it shall not be repeated. More than that we cannot do. We have no right to go further. Though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we have often found this is the best course to take. You know, almost every man, we can find some narrative in the book to really show us how, to sort out that thing and what we should do if we will study and use the big book to take our steps. Usually, somewhere within the big book study, we bring out that point. That I think one of the things that has happened in AA is that we have taken the steps, put them up on the walls. We have them in the club rooms, and we have them on little cards. And those 12 steps they are beautiful, but they're in abbreviated form. And there's no way you can take the steps just by looking at and reading the step and taking it. The only way you can take the steps is to take them out of the book, because the book is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the only book that gives us instructions for taking the steps. If you take them off the wall, it's not any instructions up there. It just gives you the steps, and you have to interpret it as what it means and try to apply it. But if we use the book, particularly in steps 8 and 9, we will see that he's given us a lot of examples and illustrations, and enable us to handle any situation we might have involved with steps 8 or 9.
I'm quite sure that my wife already knew what I was doing when I was drinking. She's not any idiot. And she had a pretty good idea of where I was going and the things that I happened to be doing while I was drinking. And if I go to her in making amends for that particular part of my life, and I begin to tell her details, name the place and the time and the person and etc., I'm sure that I'm going to hurt her worse than I ever hurt her before. It's a lot better to be suspicious about something than it is to know the actual facts sometimes. Besides, if I know my wife well, which I think I do, if I should give her names, places, dates, and details, by the time she gets through, there's going to be some other people involved in this damn thing too. And I've got to be very, very careful when I go to making these amends, because I can hurt her worse yet. Or just as importantly, we can turn right around and hurt other people involved with the other parties and etc. And if that should happen, then I'm going to have to worry about the guilt and the remorse and the fear that comes from that, and turn right around and make more amends before I'm all through. So I need to be very careful when I'm making amends to be sure that I'm not harming somebody else. And again, sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm not honest enough to be able to tell. Usually I can find my answer in the book. If I can't find it in my book, I can certainly go to my sponsor. And my sponsor can't answer it. Surely I can find somebody in AA knowledgeable enough about what we're trying to do to help me decide. If I've got any doubts, I'm not going to do anything until I'm reasonably sure of where I'm going and what I'm doing. Page 81, bottom of the page. Our design for living is not a one-way street. It is good for the wife as for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. It is better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. It may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it. See, there's prayer in the big book, every step. Having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we are dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk a face-to-face combat. In my particular case, that most certainly worked out for us real well. Top of page 83. Yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. We must take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Again, prayer in step 9. Let's go down to skip a paragraph. It says there may be some wrongs we can never fully right. And we don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Now, some people simply cannot be seen. Some people are already dead. And there's no way that I can go to them and make a direct amend. Some people that I owe amends to, I can't do it because it would harm them or other people. And in those cases, I don't worry about that. If I can honestly say to myself that I would make those amends if I could make them, then I have fulfilled the meaning of step 8 and 9. I think there's one other person that I need to make amends to, and that's me. I really believe I've harmed myself as much as I ever harmed anybody else. Now, I don't hold with the theory that while drinking I only harmed me and didn't hurt anybody else. I hurt a hell of a lot of people, but I also hurt me. And I think I need to make an amend to me too. And I think the best amend that I can make to me is to forgive me for what I used to be in the past. Now, in this process, most of us forgive other people, and most other people forgive us. But then we tend to not forgive ourselves. We keep beating ourselves over the head with that old hammer of guilt. I shouldn't have done that. I should have been better. I'm a lousy human being. That's nothing in the world but self-guilt. Self-guilt is self-resentment. And my book showed me way back in step 4 how to take care of resentment. You know, I may have to pray for me. I may have to ask God to help me forgive myself for what I've been in the past. It simply does not make any sense to forgive everybody else and not forgive me. In order for me to find peace of mind and happiness and serenity, I must forgive myself for what I've done in the past. Self cannot overcome self. I may have to have God's help in order to do this. Joe?
Go ahead and say whatever you want to.
Okay. If we have completed steps 8 and 9, we have completed the 3 areas of life. As Charlie said earlier, we begin step 5 and talked about throughout this book, it talks all throughout about the 3 dimensions of life. It talks about a design of living, and there is a design to life. And this book is written, gives us that design to live by.